That. Thank you so much for the board and whoever had a part in that. You know, I never know. Sometimes they just surprise me and say, I'm making an announcement. So I say, okay, but you know, thank you for blessing us. But let me be honest with you, it really is a blessing just for y'all letting us to be a part of your life. I enjoy spending time with our family and being a part of us as a church family. And, you know, that's a privilege to me. It's never been about money and it's never been anything else. And trust me, sometimes, and I'm going to say this might sound crazy, Joel, I'm just going to be honest with you, but sometimes when I first started as a youth pastor, they paid me like $18,500 for about 80 hours worth a week. So let me just tell you this up front. It's never been about the money. Never, okay? But I love y'all, and I thank y'all for allowing me to be a part of your life. And even if I've told the board this too, even if I had to get a part-time job and work it too, it'd be okay. Because it's never been about the money. It really has never been. So I appreciate y'all letting us have that part. So today I'm talking about a wilderness experience. Some of you are like, oh, crazy. I'm not talking about hunting today, even though bow season did crank up. I'm talking about a wilderness experience in your life. I've had about 5 or 6 people coming to me and talk to me about what's going on. They don't feel like they're going anywhere in their life. They actually feel like they're wandering. They don't feel like they can get out of the situation. They don't feel like either way, they just feel like they're just going in a big circle, and they just don't feel like they can have a breakthrough in their life. And I want to talk to you about that, about some different things that I've experienced in my own life, but some things that you may have experienced in your own life. You may be experiencing that right now. And so I want to talk to you, give you some applications, some things, some stupid things I've done. How many of you like to know when the pastor does stupid things? You know, you can read those things, same things in the Bible. I mean, it's the same thing, but that's the reason God has given us the Bible again, is so we can learn from people's mistakes. And so today I want to talk about wilderness experiences. Okay, that's going to be great. And so, yeah. And so, like I said, some people have just been saying they've been having a holding pattern, and so they feel like they're being tested. And they again, what I shared earlier, they just feel like God has just abandoned them. And let me just say this: God said He would never leave us nor forsake us, and He never abandons us. That's the enemy trying to lie to us, saying that He has, but again, He never does that to us. I thank God that He does that He never leaves us. He never has forgotten about us, no matter what we've done. He always loves us. It doesn't mean that He likes what we're doing. And some things He said He hates what we're doing, but He still loves us. But a wilderness experience is usually thought of as a tough time. Have you ever been through a tough time? Which we endure discomfort and trials. How many of you know during those tough times that you do have discomfort and you have trials? The Bible says, why are you surprised that you have trials? It says, especially as a Christian, you know those things are going to happen. The pleasant things of life are unable to be enjoyed. How many of you know that during these tough times, even the things that you like to do are not fun because you're going through a trial that you just don't want to like to do? You don't even care to do. The food just doesn't taste the same. You can't hit nothing on the golf course. I've been there. How many of you know when I play golf and I want to hit it straight, I've got to angle my body this way and hit it off the tee this way so it'll go straight. It's wild. It's exciting too for those other people, because sometimes I do hit it straight. So, wow, it's exciting. And sometimes the things that you enjoy, they may be absent altogether, and we feel a lack of encouragement. A wilderness experience is often a time of intensified temptation and spiritual attack. How many know that when you are going through something in your life and you don't feel like you can get out of it, how many know the devil likes to kick it into like 3rd and 5th gears, 4th gear, whatever? So then he wants to start attacking you. He wants to start attacking your faith. He wants to start attacking everything that you are. Even Jesus in the wilderness, he even tried to mess up who he was. And even though that's impossible to do, but he started attacking even his identity. He said, if you are the Son of God. He was the Son of God, but the enemy is trying to say, well, if you are the Son of God. He even tries to attack who you are in Christ. He tries to come at you so you don't even think that you're even a Christian anymore, because how can a Christian go through such things that I'm going through right now? He tries to attack you. He tries to make you feel like you have done something so wrong, or you're just going in the wrong direction, or you haven't heard from God. You haven't listened to God. Am I preaching to somebody today? Having a wilderness experience is not necessarily a sign that we are sinning. You can go through a wilderness experience and not have done anything wrong. You could be right where God wants you. We're going to talk about it in a little bit. It's a time of God-ordained testing sometimes. We're going to talk about that. But a wilderness experience is often linked to a mountaintop experience. A lot of times it's, how many of you know that sometimes you may have you think that everything is going great for you. And you think that everything, man, life couldn't be better. And it seems like, man, as life is going better, man, you never had a spiritual high like you've ever been. I mean, you've been hearing God's voice and everything else. And all of a sudden, like 6 months later, you're just like, wow. And you're thinking, what has happened? Sometimes some of you are thinking, man, I don't know even what that mountaintop experience looks like at all. We're going to talk about that in a minute too. Y'all still with me? So when we go to the wilderness, why we go into the wilderness, sometimes number one is we take ourselves there. How many know that every wilderness place that you go to may not be because the Lord wants you there, but sometimes our decisions take us into a wilderness spot. How many of you ever made a choice or did something that has taken you to a place that you knew that God was not there? God wasn't going to be there. Even though he leaves you, he's looking from a distance. You know what I'm saying? Like, wow. We make decisions, and some of the reason that you're going in a wilderness experience is because you choose to be there, because you're running from God. You are making decisions that have nothing to do with God. So sometimes when you're going through wilderness, you're like, well, why am I going through the wilderness? First of all, ask yourself, have I put myself here? Is that fair enough? Number two, sometimes we go to a place in the wilderness that we are led into the wilderness. We're going to talk about this in a minute too, but it says that Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness. He said, read it, it says he was led by the Spirit into the wilderness. And number three, sometimes we go through the wilderness because God is wanting to take us to a new place in him. And that's the journey you have to take. If you've ever climbed up to the top of a mountain, I've never climbed a mountain yet where I didn't have to walk through a little bit of wilderness. To see the views that you want to see, sometimes you have to climb. Sometimes you have to go through some stuff that nobody wants to go to. I went on a mule deer hunt. If you're not hunters in the room, I'm sorry, I'm just going to tell my stories. But I went on New Mexico, and they said, hey, we got to get up so we could see where all those mule deer are at. So we walked a mountain that looked about like this for like a mile. I know that sounds crazy. And I'm telling you about halfway up, I said, I didn't care if I saw a deer or not. I was like, hey, when are we going to take lunch for break? Let's make a little picnic right here. And let's just watch this view. I didn't want to walk no more. Deer or not, I could care less. I said, they can run, I don't even care. But we had to walk it. But when I got up on the mountain, I was like, oh my goodness. I was popping pictures, man. It was just beautiful. Because I could see things that I could never have saw in the wilderness. But sometimes it's a stop that he wants to take you to a place. And the only way to get to that new place in him is to go through the wilderness. Y'all still with me? So we have to climb our mountain. We have to go to our next place. Our next breakthrough. And I've never been, like, again, something that I look back. How many of you ever been through something that when you look back at it, you thought, man, that was really no big deal at all? How many of you, let me just I got a lot of stories. How many of you ever been back to your old elementary school? I'm not a good, you can tell that I'm sort of top heavy, so I'm not a very good guy to walk the balance beam. But when I was in elementary school, man, that balance beam, man, it seemed like it was like 7 foot tall. And I'd walk on it and I'd be so nervous. And I went back to my elementary school not too long ago. This is probably about 10 years ago. That's been a long time since I've been in elementary school. But I was a wobbly kid even then. I was a fat kid. I was fat, man. Somebody said, man, I'm almost down to 200. I said, I had been 200 since 6th grade, man. I was like, man, I was a big boy. I look like a bobblehead, you know what I'm saying? But, so I look back to that balance beam back then, and that balance beam was like 7 inches off the ground and like 1.5 feet and like 2 foot off the ground. But when I was in elementary school, it looked so huge. I'm thinking, what was I scared of? I still couldn't walk it now, but I'm just saying, I'm just thinking it was not that big, but when I was going through it, it's the same thing in life. Once we do it, and then we look back at it, it was like, man, that really wasn't that bad. But in the moment of those situations, in the midst of those situations, man, it looked like the biggest trials that we've ever been through. In fact, we even say stuff like I said a while ago that we say, God, I can't do this. I can't make another step. I'm scared to death. I don't know how my outcome's going to be. But once we see the other side of it, we're like, what? And that's what spiritual maturity happens, because God takes us through things and we start conquering things in our life, and we look back and say, man, I can make this one. Man, I thought this other one I wasn't going to make it through, but man, I'm making it through this one. Man, this one, it's just going to be another thing that God's going to take me to a new place in him. That's what builds your faith, because God has brought you through something, which makes your faith stronger. You're thinking, well, if God brought me through this last thing, he's going to bring me through this next thing. In the wilderness, man, it's crazy. When I was in the, again, I got hunting stories today, I'm sorry, because I want to relate to wilderness, but when I went to Maine on a hunt, man, those are some of the thickest woods I've ever been in my life. In fact, me and Joe Parama were on the same hunt, and we were literally like, from me to like Rusty, like 5 feet apart, and there were some woods, and I had some Nebo flashlights. And I'm telling you what, we had those things, they were bright flashlights, like 250 lumen flashlights, and he's sitting between like 5 feet from me, and I could hear Joe, but I could not see Joe with this flashlight on. Those were some thick woods, and there were bears out there. I got out of my same stand that day, and I started walking. I was going to try to go walk out and meet my guide, and I got to that wilderness, and I'm telling you what, I got down out of my stand, and literally just the grass and the things were like 6 feet or 7 feet over my head, where I couldn't see anything besides. And I said, there's bears out here. I went back to my stand. I climbed back up my stand. I ain't stupid. But I couldn't see my way out. That's how the wilderness is. What are we naturally supposed to do when we're in that wilderness time when we can't see? I mean, most times, have you ever been, okay, again, chubby kid story again. Here we go. But when I was a kid, how many know in Royal Rangers, I was in Royal Rangers when I was a kid, but they gave that survival guide, or that little survival kit that you make and stuff, and they said if you get lost, you're supposed to have a whistle, and you're supposed to have a compass, I wasn't very good at that. But the one thing I did have is they said you need to have a piece of caramel in your bag. I'll tell you what, I had like 35 pieces of caramel. I was like, man, if nothing else, I'm going to eat good, at least if I get lost. And so I had like those 35 pieces of caramel in my thing. But by the time we went camping, there was no 35 pieces because I'd already eaten them all. And I was like, Mom, I need some more caramel. She's like, anyways. And so, but I had that pack. But the thing that they always taught you, if you get lost or you get in a situation in those moments that you're supposed to, instead of running frantically and screaming, no offense to you girls, but as a man screaming like a little girl, trying to find your way out, what's the first thing you're supposed to do? Not eat the caramel first. That was I had to skip a few steps. But you're supposed to what? You're supposed to sit down. Wait. Think about what you're in. Get your bearings about yourself. Come up with a plan. And then eat your caramel. Why? Why are you supposed to do that in the natural? Because when you're just running around frantically trying to use your own strength and your own power, you just wear yourself out. And there's no way that you can find your way out unless you get your mind about you and get your bearings straight. And we know as Christians that the only way we do that is we sit in his presence, say, God, I'm in a wilderness right now. I'm lost, and I don't know the way out. I'm not going to be fearful because you are with me. I'm not going to be scared of what the beast and the scorpions and the bugs and all the things that could come out in the physical, but all the things that the enemy would try to send at me in the spiritual. I'm not going to be afraid because, again, you are with me. And I know that you said that you were going to protect me. You're going to keep me, even in the wilderness I'm in. Some of you are running around trying to fix all your problems yourself. You're going to this person. It's not even a Christian. You're going to this person that have all this wisdom, and you're saying, hey, I need help. You're on Google, and you're flipping it through there. How many of you know that how many of you look at that Google MD, that little medical MD? How many of you found 5 diseases that you didn't even have? You're like, well, I've got a rash here. Oh, I've got something. Oh, I feel that twingling. And as you're reading it, you're starting to feel symptoms. Yesterday, I was listening on the radio. I was in there, and they had a thing about knee joint stuff, and about how they have to, and I don't even know what I did. I was just driving. I didn't even turn the radio on. It was just on 820 on Saturday mornings, and they were talking about knee joints. If you don't have that stuff in between the knee joints, that you get bone rubbing on bone. And as I was driving, my knee started to hurt. Somebody say, you got lice? It's the truth. Lord forbid somebody say they have COVID. You start. But the wilderness that you're in, you're going to have to listen to the one that's going to get you out. Some of you need to just sit down and get into his presence again. You have to get into his presence again. I'm way off my notes, so just stay with me. I got to figure it out. Yeah, I know we're in the wilderness. That's how my notes feel right now. I'm in the wilderness. But sometimes when we get into the physical wilderness, there's a lot of things that it's rough and it's rugged and it's restless and there's wild animals, and I've talked about bugs and snakes, and it's hot and there's no sleep, there's no rest, it's unexpected. You have to be going, you get lost, but there's also things. What could be some things happening in a spiritual wilderness? What would be some of those things? Come on. Depression, okay. What else? Anxiety, okay. What else? Hopelessness, okay. What else? Fear, okay. What else? Anger, yep. What else? All those kind of things happen in a spiritual wilderness because, again, you're trying on your own knowledge and your own logic to try to get out. Let me just talk about a few people that went through a wilderness, and I'm going to talk about some things that we need to learn from them. The Israelites, how many of you know that they went through a wilderness? The cool thing about it is Moses went through his own wilderness. You look there, it said that he saw the wilderness, but what did he find in the wilderness? He found the burning bush. And so there's sometimes in our life, again, God wants to take us to a place, but Moses, he had to go through a wilderness to find the glory of God. He had to go through the wilderness. If he wasn't in that place, he would have never found the burning bush. The Israelites that came out of Egypt, they came out of a mountaintop experience. Man, God delivered them from 400 years of bondage. He had the plagues. They saw the supernatural glory of God, and yet they went through the wilderness. And how many years did they walk around in the wilderness? 40 years. It's amazing. Let me just tell you this. It's amazing that when you have a fire by night and a cloud by day, then they have God directing them day in and day out, how that they, in that situation, they still wondered and didn't know where God was leading them because it was their heart that would not allow them to. How do you have a fire by night and a cloud by day, and you see the supernatural hand of God, all things? That's the reason I said you just can't come to church and say, I'm okay because I go to church. It has to be you having your own experience. Every one of those Israelites should have had their own experience and the power of God working in their own lives, and quit trying to tell Moses, lead us. Because you can walk in the wilderness and still see God from afar. And he won't take you to where you need to be. Most of them died. All of them died. They wandered for 40 years and said, where are you? They complained about their situation. They murmured about their situation. They murmured about why they have to be there. Even though that God had provided manna, he provided water from the rock. He was providing all of their needs. They wouldn't learn the lesson that, hey, I want to talk to you. I want to have a relationship with you. So you're thinking, well, I don't want to wander in the desert. Have a relationship with him. Remember, you got to sit down and let his presence come into you. You have to open up the dialogue. I said it this last week. I said that sometimes, I said even I had a funeral this last Monday, and I just said that sometimes you may be even mad at God. God's okay if you shout at him. It's not going to hurt his feelings. But sometimes we just need to open up the dialogue, get it all out. Quit complaining. Quit pity partying it. Quit telling everybody else your problems. Sit down and get your bearings right again. Is that too hard? I'm talking from experience. I'm talking about my life. For 40 years, they wondered. They wondered, and then they wondered in their brain, God, what's going on? David had his wilderness experience. I think it's pretty awesome that David, before he was an ever-anointed king, was out in the wilderness taking care of a bunch of sheep. I thought that was just cool. He had a wilderness experience before he was ever called to do what God, maybe that's the reason God called him, because he'd already been used to the wilderness. But then he was anointed king, and then he became king, and then, or he didn't become king, and then Saul chased him. And where did he head back to? The wilderness. Imagine being king over Israel, been anointed king over Israel, and he's out there in a cave going through his wilderness. You don't think he has some things to complain about? You don't think he has some things, hey, God, I'm king over Israel. And yet God used the time. He learned more lessons in the cave than he ever did out in the field. Goliath wasn't his biggest enemy. Himself was the biggest enemy. You don't think he had some emotions living in that cave? About what should have been, how he should have been, how things should have worked out better for him? You don't think he had all those same emotions that we go through? He fought a bigger giant than Goliath in that cave because he had to defeat the things inside of him. Same thing with us. We have to defeat the things inside of us using his power and his might. We see that John the Baptist, I think it's pretty interesting that there's so many other people. I won't do it, but Elijah, he went through the whole wilderness. How many of you remember Elijah when he's sitting up there, and again, he's out in the wilderness. He has birds feeding him, by the way, running from Jezebel. They're threatening his life. And what does Elijah say? He said, God, there's nobody else but me. I'm the only one. I'm the only one standing up. All these other people, man, you see the life I'm living? And God said, hey, you ain't the only one. You may be going through something, but you ain't the only one. Every one of us are going through our own wilderness of some kind. Some of you may be on a mountaintop right now. I praise God for that. But the wilderness is coming. I'm going to be honest with you. The wilderness is coming, not to say that, to speak that over your life, because it's called life, and it's called the enemy, and it's also called God, because he wants to do something in our life too. But John the Baptist, it says that after the Israelites totally didn't make it into the promised land, and so for 400 years, the Bible says that there wasn't really a voice from the Lord during those 400 years, and all of a sudden it says there's one come preaching in the desert. It's amazing that the Israelites had to go where to go hear the word of the Lord. It said that John the Baptist was in the wilderness. From where God left them before they went out to do all the things, to again, they have to come back to the wilderness to hear the voice of the Lord. It may be the same for you. God's calling you into a place that you're not being obedient to go. Because going into the wilderness, again, I want to say this in a physical realm, I like to go in the wilderness, but there's some parts of the wilderness I'm like, no, I ain't going. Let me just put it this way. When Jesus was doing his ministry, Jesus said he always went to a desolate place, that he always went to a place away from everybody else. He went up on the mountain, or he found a wilderness place. It says several times that he went out in the wilderness and he found a desolate place to find who is he meeting with? But you don't see the crowds following him up to the mountain to meet with the Father. They wanted Jesus, but they didn't want to crawl up the mountain. It's amazing. Everybody, even in our church, and in every church in America, and every church in the world, we all want to see the Father, but we're not willing to go through the things that we need to get to the Father. We don't want to take the time that it's going to take to crawl up the mountain because we have a schedule. We don't want to have to leave our friends behind to go up the mountain because they're our friends and we would hate to hurt their feelings. We all have responsibilities that we have to take care of, and yet Jesus said that even with the I think Jesus had a pretty good amount of responsibility saving the world. And he said he woke up early in the morning, and he left the disciples sleeping, and he said, hey, I'll be back later. And he crawled up to a desolate place. He crawled up to a place that doesn't look like there's a whole lot of growth. Everybody likes to sit in the beauty of the wilderness, but nobody likes to go to the desolate place where the Father's speaking sometimes. It's the reason everybody loves the valley where the fruit trees are growing. Except when we get to the valley of the shadow of the death, which David said, hey, but he said that he walks with us through the valley. So he says that we're all going to have those valley and wilderness experiences. Are y'all still with me today? The only people, and we were talking about this in staff, and I think Andrew said it, and it was a great illustration. I'm going to use it today, but they said that Peter, James, and John, and Jesus invited him to go up to the mountain. And as they got to the top of the mountain, it says that he was transfigured before him. It said they saw the glory of the Father. But they hadn't seen the glory of the Father until they took the trip up the mountain. And it said that his glory was shown to them. I'm asking you today, in all the things that we go through in the wilderness, and we're going through these times, are you willing to just determine in your mind, are you willing to say in your mind, hey, look, this is a season that I'm walking through, but I'm going to say, God, is this from you? Are you leading me to it? Because the reason it said that God allowed them to walk in the wilderness, the Israelites, the reason God said that he allowed them to walk in the Israelites? Because they said that he was testing them to see if all of it was just talk or if they was going to live it. He said he led them walk in the desert all those years because he said, hey, I want to know if you're really serious about me. And that generation could have walked into the promised land, what God had asked them to do, but because they would not listen to him, they would not follow his direction, where they didn't want to go where he was going. He said they all died in that wilderness. Today, some of you may be having a spiritual death because you're just God saying, if you'll just listen to me, if you'll just follow me, if you'll just walk in my footsteps, man, I want to lead you to a promised land. I want to lead you out of this. I want to take you to a new place in me. I want to take you out of this situation you're going through. I want to help you in your marriage and your family. I want to help you through your sickness and the disease that you may have in your body. I want to help you do all those kind of things. I want to help you financially. I want to help you in all these ways if you will listen to me and be obedient. And all those things, after they walked up the mountain, they saw his glory. What is God trying to show you in your life? What is God trying to speak to you in your life right now? Is he trying to lead you into a place? Because sometimes we blame it on the enemy, but it's really not. It's God leading you to a place because he's saying, you know what? You've been drinking milk for a long time. I heard an evangelist always say, it's always funny when you're drinking milk and you have a mustache. Spiritually speaking. Daniel, you would look great. But God's calling us to something deeper, and we can't always drink spiritual milk. Yeah, it could sustain us, but it's not going to help us grow. Sometimes we have to go to the wilderness, and he's strengthening us spiritually. And nowadays, and what we're having to face now in our world, it's going to take more than just a casual Christian to make it in these days we're walking in. He's calling you to grow. He's calling you to walk through the wilderness because he wants you to see you do something for him. I'm finishing up. All the crowds, they met Jesus. And God's always cool. He'll meet us where we're at. And I talked about that earlier, but God will always meet us where we're at. But, sometimes he wants you to go where he's going. He wants to show you his glory to him. And I'm almost done, I think. I'll say this, and I'm gonna finish up. It says, the wilderness is our proving ground. The wilderness is our proving ground, and I'm going to go into what that means here in a second, but we have to move. After we're quiet, and God's saying it, and we get our bearings right, we start listening to God, then it's our time to move. We're going through something. I talked to you about it, that we go through the valley of the shadow of death. We go through the valley of the shadow. And it says, even in the midst of the valley of the shadow of death, he gives us peace. He gives us rest in the midst of the wilderness. It means no matter, I'll just be honest with you. I'll say this too. When we went on that bear hunt with Ronnie and Joe, I mean, they had to sit on the ground, or Joe had to sit on the ground. He was scared to death about the bears out there, which I understand. I was up in a tree, even though they can climb trees. But in the midst of grizzly bears and all the things that are out there, how is it that God's saying, in the midst of those things, through the valley of the shadow of death, I'm going to lead you to green pastures. I'm going to give you rest and peace. Only God can do that in the wilderness. God's trying to take you somewhere today. You either got yourself in the wilderness, and that's simply easy to fix. Sit down, get into his presence, and he's going to lead you out if you'll be obedient. Or he led you to that place because he wants to show himself to you. He wants to strengthen you. He wants you to grow in this season. So don't complain about it. Say, God, what do I need to learn right now? And third, he's taking you there because he has something more for you. He has something more for you. So some things that we need to learn in the wilderness. Number one is we need to learn who we trust. Yeah, there it is. Number two, I won't spend a lot of time, but we need to learn what we trust in. Who we trust and what we trust in. Number three is we need to learn sometimes we can't do it by ourselves. Times in my life, personal experiences, I tried to, because I've been a Christian most of my life. But I was trying to figure out, I can do this. I got this. And after frustration and years of frustration, trying to do it and trying to come up with I've read some book, or I read this, or I've done this, I just said, you know what, I can't do this by myself. There's no way. Let me just tell you, you're never going to get out of the wilderness by yourself. And if for some reason you do, God's going to take you back through the wilderness until you learn the lesson he wanted to teach you in the first place. You're thinking, well, why do I keep going through this cycle in my life? Because you're skirting the issue of what he's trying to teach you. I say this, and I used this illustration before, so some of you are new, so I'm going to say it. That's the reason I hate the new video games. I've said this before several times. But the new video games, because you can save your spot in the new video games. You know how mad that makes me? You know how many times that if I lost I was on level Mario Brothers like 8-8 or whatever it was, and I just had one more 8-4, I had that one little stupid dude to defeat, and I would lose. And I'd have to go all the way back to 1-1, unless you had the cheat codes. And now they just say, would you like to save your place? Yes. Our generation doesn't understand what it is to go through and to keep fighting, to have to pray through, to have to keep walking, to have to keep enduring it with God's help and God's strength. That's the reason that the generation of World War II, they say that was the greatest generation, because they understood that. We've become weak as Christians. We've become weak as people sometimes. The slightest little inconvenience for us, we're like, I'm out. And God's saying, man, if you will let me work on you. I mean, what do you work out? I don't know. I mean, I've heard. But when you work out, the reason, you're actually tearing your muscles. You're actually, because when they grow back, they grow back stronger. God's He's trying to stretch you to the place where you feel like you can't make it. And he said, you can make it. He sees the potential in you. He says he sees where he wants to take you because he has plans for you. Plans to what? Yeah. I got to stop again. I'm going to say this one more thing. If you could see what God had in store for you, if you could see it, would you stop short? No. In the same way, if you could see the wilderness you may have to walk through to get it, you'd be like, oh. That's the reason sometimes you don't know you're lost until you get in the middle of it. But if you knew what he had in store for you, you wouldn't quit. Number 4, I've already said this, to get where we are supposed to be, that's the only way to get there is through the wilderness. Number 5, if we don't learn in the wilderness what we need to learn, we may spend our whole life wondering, and falling short of our purpose, even dying. You may be living, but spiritually you'll be dead. I'll say that again. Even though you may be living and walking through life, spiritually you may be dead if you give up. Number 6, everything you are going through may not be the enemy. God may be leading you, testing you, stretching you, and growing you. We blame the enemy for some things that God's trying to, again, do in our life. He wants you to be a mighty warrior for him. He wants you to stand with the full armor of God. We're going to talk about that starting, I'm not trying to advertise, I guess I am. But on the 17th of October, on Wednesday nights, we're going to start talking about spiritual warfare. He wants you to stand. He wants you to be a mighty man and woman of God. He wants you in the middle of the wilderness to sit and say, you know what, come what may. I'm going to keep walking. I'm going to keep listening. I'm going to keep obeying. And whatever I have to go through, whatever attacks me, whatever I may have to kill along the way. How many of you like to kill some of the things the enemy's sending at you? Destroy them forever. Some of those generational things you're thinking, man, this has been passed down way too long. What if you're the one that's going to break them? And they won't be passed down to your kids and your grandkids and all those kind of things. What if you break that? Because the wilderness he's asking to, even though the blood of Jesus, we know that we don't have to put up with it, but some of you need to, in your brain and in your mind, say no more. So bow your heads today.